Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/Teamaneke.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our 2020 Iditarod coverage here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and you will get your episodes in your podcast feed as soon as they drop. You don't have to wait around for us to announce it. And I am joined today by my co-host, Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going today?
It's going great, Robert. We have a kind of busy Iditarod day today, and a lot of things to talk about. So I'm happy to just jump right into them.
Yeah, let's jump in. Before we do, Alex, I'm looking at the standings right now, and it looks like the top 30 have either completed or are in the middle of their 24. A heck of a lot of them are past the halfway point of Cripple and soon to be on their way to Ruby, and many others are in Ophir, and just a few are in Takotna, and a few at the back of the pack are still in McGrath. So it looks like things are rocking and rolling on the trail, doesn't it?
It really does. And almost everyone who has not yet completed their 24 is taking their 24 right now. So I expect that by the time we get on the air tomorrow, pretty much everyone will have completed their 24.
And it has been a huge day in terms of news for Iditarod and pretty much the sports world in general. And I have to tell you, there's a heck of a lot of panic going on around the world about this coronavirus. Before we jump into the Iditarod portion of it, what are your thoughts with this? This is kind of unprecedented times. And since we sort of have a platform where we're sharing our opinions, what are your thoughts on the current state of affairs with the pandemic going on?
You know, I'm of two minds of it. I'm not sure if what is going on is an overreaction. And then there's another part of me that thinks, well, what if we're underreacting? What if we're not taking this seriously enough? And I know that there's a lot of stuff going on here in Los Angeles. The mayor asked for any event that had more than 50 people at it to be canceled. And a lot of people are working from home. A lot of the school districts are canceling classes, and not just colleges canceling classes, which we've heard a lot about, but you know, like high school and middle school and younger grades, and trying to do as much of that online as possible. It's going to be a huge disruption and a huge mess. And hopefully, you know, these steps that we're taking will result in it being brought under control relatively quickly. But, you know, the next couple of weeks are going to be very, very stressful for a lot of people.
I agree with you. And we think that we're a little bit insulated up here in Alaska. And up until this afternoon, I don't think we had any confirmed cases. I think just this evening one was announced on the local news here. So we're sort of in that spot where we are with just about everything, sort of the last ones to get any type of anything, whether it be fashion or pandemics up here in Alaska. And that's really playing havoc on the local economy. And of course, tourism season is coming up, and they've canceled all the cruise ships till the end of the month, or I think even into May. So that's really going to hurt the local economy. But in the meantime, there's a heck of a lot of fans from all over the world that are coming up or plan to come up for the finishing ceremonies in Nome. What do you have to report from Iditarod and from the city of Nome itself?
Yeah, they had an emergency meeting of the Nome City Council today to talk about coronavirus and what they wanted people to do, and they voted to basically cancel all public events, including all public Iditarod-related events. So traditionally, there is a mushing-related art show at the mini convention center, and that's been canceled. There's a musher meet and greet a week from Saturday, and that's been canceled. And perhaps most important, the finishers banquet has been canceled. And it's not clear if there's going to be a smaller version of that just for the mushers that maybe would be broadcast and people could watch online, or if there's just not going to be a finishers banquet at the moment. And that's a pretty huge thing. Additionally, one of the city councilors said that people should just not come to Nome for the finish of the race. Now, the race is still going on, unlike in Norway where they stopped the Finnmarket slope at 1,200 kilometer race in the middle. They just the Norwegian government decided they weren't going to have any more sporting events. So when people got into the next checkpoint, they were told, "Sorry, the race is over. We're not continuing." The Iditarod is still continuing. But it's going to be very odd because they are actively telling people not to come. And all of the public buildings that people generally gather in, like the mini convention center and the Convention and Visitors Bureau and some of the schools and some other buildings, are not going to be open to the public. So it's a very strange thing. A lot of people plan these trips to Nome, 10 months or a year in advance, book their flights and hotels and all of that. And, I assume some of those people won't come, but a lot of them will. And then the people are just kind of, there's not a lot for them to do. So I think the bars and the restaurants are still going to be open. And I think there's going to be a lot of people gathering there.
Yeah, I agree with just about everything you said there. And we're going to talk about the Serum Run expedition in just a second, them finishing up in Nome today. And that's my sort of first thought. We were talking just a little bit ago about us being insulated from the rest of the country and somewhat in the rest of the world. And Nome is even more insulated. I mean, it's not on the road system. The only way in and out right now is by plane or, of course, snow machine. And then in the summer, right now they even have a few cruise ships coming up, but they are really isolated up there. And if somebody were to bring something up, it could really cause a heck of a lot of havoc to the residents up there. I'm thinking about, back in the early days of our country, how the Europeans brought smallpox into the areas with the Native Americans. That's something that could be very similar in terms of decimation for a place like that. But on the second part of that, you had talked about where most people go to hang out during this week of Iditarod festivities. And you and I have both been to Nome several times, and we know the layout, and there is not a heck of a lot to do. And there's only 2 or 3 bars that are there, and of course they can only hold a handful of people. But when you get several hundred, maybe several thousand people trying to congregate in just a few bars over a week's time, that's going to lead to a little bit of a feisty situation, isn't it?
It really is. And, I am not a virologist or like an expert on diseases. And unlike a lot of people lately, I don't even pretend to be that on Twitter. But from what I've heard, this is a serious disease. Um, it is much more serious for the elderly and for people who have some sort of underlying compromised immune system issue. And so, for people who are healthy and are in their 30s and 40s and 50s, it is not something you want to get, but it is not a serious and life-threatening disease as far as we know. But the danger is that if a lot of times people will be infected and they won't realize that they're infected because they're not symptomatic yet, and apparently this disease can be spread before the symptoms start showing up. And so the real, as I see it, the real serious danger is that people who have the disease will spread it unwillingly or unknowingly to those who are elderly, who are at much, much greater risk. And there's a much higher mortality rate with people who are over 70 or 80, or people who have some sort of underlying immune issue. And, I'm not saying that people are doing this on purpose, but just in going about your daily life, you could be inadvertently spreading it.
So before we move over to the next topic, Alex, how do you think this is going to play out in terms of Iditarod? And more importantly, I bet the 50 odd people that are out on the trail, many of them don't even know that this is happening right now. You don't have the chance to sit back and watch the news. And if you're in and out of checkpoints relatively quickly, you're not getting a lot of this information. So I don't think a lot of the mushers know about it. But what are your thoughts? How do you think this is going to play out over the next week or so?
I think it'll go one of two ways. Either it will be relatively subdued. There will be fewer people in Nome when the winter comes in, but still a fairly large contingent, a couple of hundred maybe instead of a couple of thousand. And that's probably the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that things continue to get worse in the rest of the country and in the rest of the world, and they have to make the very drastic decision that nobody wants to call off the race. I don't think that is going to happen, but I think that's really the worst case scenario.
I agree with you for sure. So let's move over to the next topic relatively quickly. We talked briefly about the Serum Run expedition. For folks that have listened to us for many months, you know that I was one of the organizers of the Serum Run trip, and I had to pull out because of a busted snow machine. But we're happy to report that 9 of the expeditioners arrived in Nome today. All 5 dog mushers arrived, and then 4 snow machiners. They spent 20 days on the trail. They started on February 22nd, and they arrived in Nome at about 3 p.m. local time, to a heck of a lot of cheers from friends and family. And it's my understanding even some local folks went down to the beach to watch them come in. So kudos to those guys and congratulations on finishing that. And I'm very happy to be a part of it. The next thing that we want to talk about, Alex, this is something we talked a little bit about last night. We mentioned we were going to talk about it tonight, and that is the story about Lance Mackey and the use of CBD oil on his dogs. And that's really caused a lot of a stir, hasn't it?
It really has. And there's CBD oil is legal. It's legal in all 50 states if it's derived from hemp. And CBD stands for, I think, cannabinoid. And it is also, you can get it from marijuana plants. And it used to be that hemp and all hemp byproducts were completely illegal. And then the Farm Bill a couple of years ago legalized this. So you can now get CBD oil that is derived from hemp, and it's legal in all 50 states. And I know that I have a lot of personal experience with using CBD oil after I hurt my shoulder, and found that it was enormously helpful. And I know that you've had experience with CBD oil and dogs. And, with a lot of times with people, we think, oh, well, maybe it's just the placebo effect. But that's not true with dogs. Dogs don't have the placebo effect.
Right. And there's a very interesting study out, and I'm going to try to put the source in our show notes, that say that I think it's 19 point something % of folks that sign up for dog training also use CBD oil on their dogs. And that's a pretty big statistic. If a fifth of the dog owners that are getting training for their dogs offer CBD oil to them, obviously something is working. And we are suppliers of CBD oil for dogs, mainly for behavior issues like anxiety, separation, other types of behavior issues. It works pretty well on it. It provides that calming effect, and it reduces a heck of a lot that anxiety. But I'm not quite sure how effective it would be in terms of sled dogs or in mushing. I know you've used it as a benefit when you had your injured shoulder. And I never have used it, so I cannot say one way or the other whether it works or not to alleviate pain, etc. How did it work for you? Then maybe we can kind of draw a parallel with what Lance is doing compared to kind of a human response to it.
Well, first, I should say that it's a little bit different with everybody. And I know that that's frustrating to some people because we're used to, seeing these pharmaceuticals and these, over-the-counter medicines where there's a prescribed use and everyone does the same thing and you get more or less the same results. It's not quite the case with CBD oil. But I will tell you that it literally was the only thing that did anything for me in terms of pain relief. And when I first hurt my shoulder, they put me on opioids, but the opioids didn't really help with the pain. And if I was lucky, they would knock me out, but about half the time they wouldn't even do that. And so when I first started taking CBD oil, it was pretty much a revelation. And my fear is that I have since then turned a little bit into that guy who corners you at parties and wants to talk to you for 20 minutes about CBD oil. But it really was an enormous, enormous help for me.
And for our longtime listeners, you would know, and this is how this is relevant, that this was a mushing injury from Alex. He was on a dog sled here at our kennel and took a nasty fall and dislocated his shoulder and broke a couple of bones up there. So it was a really nasty injury. But in sake of mushing radio, it was a mushing injury. So I guess that is par for the course a little bit. So in terms of the article about Lance, there's been a lot of talk back and forth about how this should be banned. It could be a potential performance enhancer. It should be on the list of drugs that aren't allowed. But he says pretty much he uses it on his dogs every day. And if I remember correctly, he said that he uses about $100 worth a day on his dogs. But it's also important to note that he has a sponsor called the High Expedition, which is a dispensary here in the Mat-Su Valley in Talkeetna. So I would assume that he's getting a discount or potentially samples or a supply of it as part of that sponsorship. What are your thoughts about using it, whether it's legal or not, in terms of the list?
Yeah, I think that it is something that has a lot of potential to be very helpful for the dogs. And I know that there are Lance is partnered with one of these manufacturers and endorses it. So there's a little bit of, he has a vested interest in using it and going forward. But there are a bunch of other mushers who use it as well on their dogs. And in the article that was in the ADN, he talked about how he had this conversation with Stu Nelson, who's the chief vet for Iditarod. And Stu said, I respectfully request that you stop doing this. And Lance said, I respectfully am not going to listen to that. And, really, if the ITC wants to make it illegal, wants to make it a substance that can't be used, then they should do that. But if they, they can't really have it both ways. And if it is something that's acceptable and legal for the mushers to use, I don't know how they can then complain about somebody using it.
I'm sort of up in the air about this one. I'm not sure about where my opinion lies right now. And the reason I say this is something you said, how it worked on you. You said it was one of the few things that helped the pain when you were dealing with your shoulder injury. And when you said that, I immediately thought back to the doping scandal a few years ago with Dallas-Evi and all of that. And they said the same thing, that tramadol, which is a drug that you give dogs to mask pain. It's a pain reliever for pretty significant pain on dogs. Don't you think that that's a real close line there?
It could be. It definitely could be.
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially getting both sides of the coin from Stu Nelson and Lance Mackey. I don't know if anything drastic will happen. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I think this is a story that is developing, as they say on the big time news sites.
Right. Absolutely.
So what else is happening?
So I think we're going to switch over to our musher of the day right now. And today's musher is rookie Riley Deich. Riley grew up in Shenandoah, Iowa, and now lives in Fairbanks. He has been racing for 6 years. He started his career as a musher by working as a tour guide in Colorado, and then got hooked on the mushing lifestyle, moved to Alaska in 2013, and worked for Alaska Icefield Expeditions, where he's worked every summer and now brings his own dogs down there to give sled dog tours on the glacier. He moved to the Fairbanks area and began acquiring dogs and building his own kennel in 2016. He has run races like the Yukon Quest, the big Yukon Quest in 2018, where he won the Sportsmanship Award, as well as the Yukon Quest 300 this year. When he first started working with dogs, he worked as a handler for Matt Hall and Ryan Olson, and also worked with Iditarod vet Sven Haltman before he started Dark Horse Kennels in 2016. And he has currently about 30 dogs. And he told Cale Casey before the start of Iditarod that although he's been in Alaska for 8 years, he has only been to Anchorage once before he was there last Saturday for the ceremonial start. He lives off the grid near Fairbanks, and that means that he has to haul all of his own water, and he powers his cabin that he lives in with a portable generator. And he said that his dogs each require about a gallon of water per day. So that means he's filling a 125-gallon water tank about every 4 or 5 days. And doing that, along with heating his cabin with a wood stove, makes having dogs an awful lot of work. He told his hometown newspaper that he had read an article from an Alaskan trapping magazine in the 70s where an old timer talked about dog mushing as the greatest workload for return of any draft animal. And he said that between scooping poop, watering and feeding, and then adding in 6 to 8 hour training runs with the adults and free walking the puppies every day before or after training the adults, and then just getting water and wood and heating things up and making sure the dogs are fed and he's fed, that all takes a lot of time. He still works on the glacier in the summers, and then from November through March, while he's training, he also does tours with a local touring kennel. And he said that he works about 4 days a week for them giving tours. And then he trains in the evenings and on his days off. And he said, the reason I do what I do is because these dogs genuinely love their job. And he said, I love watching them work, and they've been bred since 2000 BC to pull, and to them it's like a Labrador playing fetch. And he said that representing this lifestyle in a positive light is his major goal. He has a great emphasis on making sure that his dogs are happy, because he says that happy dogs are the best athletes, and that's his primary focus and the reason why he's deliberately keeping his kennel relatively small, so he can get to know each of the dogs and how they can best develop their own potential. Before the race, he told Alaska Public Media that he is fine with a slow trail because he lives and trains in a really hilly area. So his dogs are used to hard pulling. And he said that in the summer, they do glacier tours in chest deep snow, and they're used to punching around and slogging through deep snow. So he says, I'm all right for it. I'm all right with it. It's just going to be more work for me, but that also will keep me warm when I'm out on the trail where it's really cold. He's doing very well right now. I believe he is taking his 24, and I think he is currently in McGrath. And he's just a very interesting musher, and one of these guys who really likes being away from crowds, away from the city, and just really loves being out there with his dogs. And actually, I'm just looking at the standings, and it looks like he has completed his 24, and he's now out past Ophir on his way up to Cripple.
You know, Alex, I really like this young man. He was on our show about a year and a half ago, and he was a great guest. He's one of those guys that can talk just about anything. And when I have guests on my show, I try not to do the typical journalist type questions. Tell me about your dogs and tell me about your history and that sort of thing. I really try to dive deep, and he was a great interview, and I'm going to see if I can find that for folks and put it on our show notes page, because I think folks will really enjoy it. And also I encourage folks to check out darkhorseSledDogs.com. That's his website. It's a very cool looking website, and I think this guy, he's a rookie now, but I think he is that changing of the guard that we talked about at the top of the coverage this year. And I know that Danny Seavey also talked about that as well. So I think we're going to hear this guy's name over many years. Don't you agree?
I definitely agree. And, you know, it's always a challenge for people who have their own kennels, especially relatively small kennels, to be able to make this work financially. He seems to have figured out a good way to do it. And if he can keep that up and, you know, get some good sponsorship, this is someone that I think we can expect to be running this race for the next 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I love talking about stories about these lesser known guys, and he is one to watch out for sure. Alex, we have just a couple of minutes. What else do you want to say before we end the show?
You know, I am like you. I'm really, really proud of all of the Serum Run people. I know that there were some real challenges on the trail with your snow machine, and there was another snow machine that was being fixed that apparently caught fire. And these people have really just hung in there and gotten all the way to Nome. And I just think that that's a real testament to all of them and to the expedition itself. And I'm really, really proud that they made it there.
I am too. And as we said on the trail, it's just another day traveling across Alaska in the middle of winter. So yeah, kudos to them for sure. Guys, we are just about out of time. We're going to be back on the air for tomorrow's coverage at about 7 p.m. Alaska time. And be sure you hit that subscribe button and do us a favor and tell a friend about our show. I'm sure there's a heck of a lot of Iditarod fans out there that are going to have a lot of time on their hands in the next week or two that now that they probably aren't going to travel up to Nome. So maybe they can get their daily dose of Iditarod right here on our show. Alex, it's a pleasure as always. We'll talk again soon, okay?
Okay, thanks, Robert.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio. Did you know that Alaska DogWorks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska DogWorks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.